Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. This is Michael Reeds. If you're new here, my name is Michael, and this is where we read powerful books together with intention, not for passive consumption, but for active transformation. On this channel, we do not read simply to collect information. We read to cultivate identity because knowledge that does not shape behavior remains unused potential. Today, we continue chapter 14 of Bushido, The Soul of Japan, the chapter titled The Training and Position of Women. So I split this chapter into two parts. So we're going into chapter 2 today. And just a brief summary of the first part that I did on Tuesday. I did it as a live stream. It's on the channel if you could have a look and have a look at the back catalogue as well, as we started this book from chapter 1. But in part 1 of chapter 14, we explored how women within the Bushido tradition were trained with deliberate focus on their character. Their formation centered on discipline, dignity, emotional composure, loyalty, and inner strength. So education was not ornamental, it was preparatory. It was designed to equip them for responsibility within the family structure and society. We paused at the line, the gratitude we owe him is deep as the sea and as high as the hills. That sentence marked a shift from training alone to deeper reflections on honor, devotion, and relational duty. Part 1 laid the foundation. Part 2 completes the structure. So if part 1 was about formation, part 2 moves further into interpretation. Inaza Nitobe now expands on the moral expectations placed upon women, the social structure surrounding them, and how their influence, though often quiet, shape the ethical tone of the household. Excuse me. The second half requires nuance because while the cultural framework differs significantly from modern society, the underlying principles of character, devotion, strength, and influence remain relevant. Our task here is not to replicate the past nor to judge it hastily, but to extract what is timeless. Before we begin the reading, if you have found value in this series, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone committed to growth, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so that you do not miss future chapters. Your engagement helps this message reach those who may never open a book themselves. Now, I will continue from where I left off at the end of part 1. And now we're going into part 2. Woman's surrender of herself to the good of her husband, home, and family was as willing and honorable as the man's self-surrender to the good of his lord and country. Self-renunciation, without which no life enigma can be solved, was the ketone of the loyalty of man as well as of the domesticity of women. She was no more the slave of man than was her husband of his liege lord, and the part she played was recognized as Naijo, the inner help In the ascending scale of service stood woman, who annihilated herself for man, that he might annihilate himself for the master, that he in turn might obey heaven. I know the weakness of this teaching and that the superiority of Christianity is nowhere more manifest than here, in that it requires of each and every living soul direct responsibility to its Creator. Nevertheless, as far as the doctrine of service, the serving of a cause higher than one's own self, even at the sacrifice of one's individuality, I say the doctrine of service, which is the greatest that Christ preached and is the sacred keynote of his mission, as far as that is concerned, Bushido is based on eternal truth. My readers will not accuse me of undue prejudice in favor of slavish surrender of volition. I accept in a large measure the view advanced with breadth of learning and defended with pro- profundity profundity of thought by Hegel, that history is the unfolding and realization of freedom. The point I wish to make is that the whole teaching of Bushido was so thoroughly imbued with the spirit of self-sacrifice that it was required not only of women but of man. Hence, until the influence of its precepts is entirely done away with, our society will not realize the view rashly expressed by an American exponent of women's rights who exclaimed, "May all the daughters of Japan rise in revolt against ancient customs." Can such a revolt succeed? Will it improve the female status? Will the rights they gain by such a summary process repay the loss of that sweetness of disposition, that gentleness of manner, which are their present heritage? Was not the loss of domesticity on the part of Roman matrons, followed by moral corruption, too gross to mention? Can the American reformer assure us that a revolt of our daughters is the true course of their historical development to take? These are grave questions. Changes must and will come without revolts. In the meantime, let us see whether the status of the fair sex under the Bushido regimen was really so bad as to justify a revolt. We hear much of the outward respect European knights paid to God and the ladies. The incongruity of the two terms making Gibbon blush. We are also told by Holman that the morality of chivalry was coarse, that gallantry implied illicit love. The effect of chivalry on the weaker vessel was food for reflection on the part of philosophers. M. Guizot, contending that feudalism and chivalry wrought wholesome influences, while Mr. Spencer tells us that in a militant society, the position of women is necessarily low, improving only as society becomes more industrial. Now, is M. Guizot's theory true of Japan, or is Mr. Spencer's? In reply, I might aver that both are right. The military class in Japan was restricted to the samurai, comprising nearly 2 million souls. Above them were the military nobles, the daimyo, and the court nobles, the kuge. These higher sybaritical nobles being fighters only in name. Below them were masses of the common people, mechanics, tradesmen, and peasants, whose life was devoted to arts of peace. Thus, what Herbert Spencer gives as the characteristics of a militant type of society may be said to have been exclusively confined to the samurai class, while those of the industrial type were applicable to the classes above and below it. This is well illustrated by the position of woman, for in no class did she experience less freedom than among the samurai. Strange to say, the lower and social class, as, for instance, among small artisans, the more equal was the position of husband and wife. Among the higher nobility, too, the difference in the relations of the sexes was well marked, chiefly because there were few occasions to bring the differences of sex into prominence, the leisurely nobleman having become literally effeminate. Thus, Spencer's dictum was fully exemplified in old Japan. As to Guizot's, those who read his presentation of a feudal community will remember that he had the higher nobility especially under consideration, so that his generalization applies to the daimyo and the kuge. I shall be guilty of gross injustice to historical truth if my words give one a very low opinion of the status of women under Bushido. I do not hesitate to state that she was not treated as man's equal, but until we learn to discriminate between difference and inequalities, there will always be misunderstandings upon the subject. When we think in how few respects men are equal amongst themselves, e.g., for example, uh, before law courts or voting polls, it seems idle to trouble ourselves with a discussion on the equality of sexes. When the American Declaration of Independence said that all men were created equal, it had no reference to their mental or physical gifts. It simply repeated what Alpian long ago announced, that before the law all men are equal. Legal rights were in this case the measure of their equality. Were the law the only scale by which to measure the position of women in a community, it would be easy to tell where she stands as to give her avoirdupois in pounds and ounces. But the question is there a correct standard in comparing the relative social position of the sexes? Is it right, is it enough to compare woman's status to man's as the value of silver is compared with that of gold and give the ratio numerically? Such a method of calculation excludes from consideration the most important kind of value which a human being possesses, namely the intrinsic. In view of the manifold variety of requisites for making each sex fulfill its earthly mission, the standard to be adopted in measuring its relative position must be of a composite character, or, to borrow from economic language, it must be a multiple standard. Bushido had a standard of its own, and it was binomial. It tried to gauge the value of woman on the battlefield and by the hearth. There she counted for very little, here for all. The treatment accorded her corresponded to the double measurement. As a social political unit, not much, while as wife and mother she received highest respect and deepest affection. Why, among so military a nation as the Romans, were their matrons so highly venerated? Was it not because they were matrona mothers, not as fighters or lawgivers, but as their mothers did men bow before them? So with us, while fathers and husbands were absent in field or camp, the government of the household was left entirely in the hands of mothers and wives. The education of the young, even their defense, was entrusted to them. The warlike exercises of women, of which I have spoken, were primarily to enable them intelligently to direct and follow the education of their children. I have noticed a rather superficial notion prevailing among half-informed foreigners that because the common Japanese expression for one's wife is my rustic wife and the like, she is despised and held in little esteem. When it is told that such phrases as my foolish father, my swinish son, my awkward self are in current use, is not the answer clear enough? To me, it seems that our idea of marital union goes in some ways further than the so-called Christian. Man and woman shall be one flesh. The individualism of the Anglo-Saxon cannot let go of the idea that husband and wife are two separate persons. Hence, when they disagree, their separate rights are recognized, and when they agree, they exhaust their vocabulary in all sorts of silly pet names and nonsensical blandishments. It sounds highly irrational to our ears when a husband or wife speaks to a third party of his other half, better or worse, as being lovely, bright, kind, and whatnot. Is it good taste to speak of oneself as my bright self, my lovely disposition, and so forth? We think praising one's own wife or one's own husband is praising a part of one's own self, and self-praise is regarded, to say the least, as bad taste among us, and I hope among Christian nations too. I've diverged at some length because the polite debasement of one's consort was a usage most in vogue among the samurai. The Teutonic races, beginning their tribal life with a superstitious awe of the fair sex, though this is really wearing off in Germany, and the Americans, beginning their social life under the painful consciousness of the numerical insufficiency of women. The respect man pays of women has in Western civilization become the chief standard of morality. But in the martial ethics of Bushido, the main watershed dividing the good and the bad was sought elsewhere. It was located along the line of duty which bound man to his own divine soul and then to others' souls. In the 5 relations I have mentioned in the early part of this paper. Of these, we have brought to our readers' notice loyalty, the relation between one man as vassal and another as lord. Upon the rest, I have only dwelt incidentally as occasion presented itself, because they were not peculiar to Bushido. Being founded on natural affections, they could but be common to all mankind, though in some particulars they may have been accentuated by conditions which, its teachings induced. In this connection, there comes before me the peculiar strength and tenderness of friendship between man and man, which often added to the bond of brotherhood a romantic attachment doubtless intensified by the separation of the sexes in youth, a separation which denied to affection the natural channel open to it in Western chivalry or in the free intercourse of Anglo-Saxon lands. I might fill pages with Japanese versions of the story of Damon and Pythias, or Achilles and Patroclus, or Tal in Bushido parlance of ties as sympathetic as those bound David and Jonathan. It is not surprising, however, that the virtues and teachings unique in the precepts of knighthood did not remain circumscribed to the military class. It makes us hasten to the consideration of the influence of Bushido on the nation at large. What stands out in the second half of the chapter is the recognition of influence without loudness. The women described were not always positioned at the forefront of public life, yet their presence shaped the moral climate of the home. And from the home society itself, influence does not require visibility to be powerful. In modern terms, we often equate impact with platform size. We measure worth by audience, income, or recognition. Yet, this chapter reminds us that the most enduring influence is often exercised in quiet consistency. Consider the home, for example. The emotional tone of the household shapes the mindset of its members. Stability, encouragement, structure, and calm guidance creates an environment which individuals thrive in. Chaos, by contrast, produces uncertainty and reaction. The unseen effort that sustains peace is not dramatic, yet its effects compound across the generations. The principle extends beyond family life. In business, culture is rarely built by mission statements alone. It is formed by the daily conduct of individuals. A leader who models composure under pressure influences more effectively than one who relies solely on authority. A colleague who brings steadiness to difficult moments strengthens the entire environment. So, this chapter also challenges us to think about strength differently. Strength is not always forceful, sometimes it appears as restraint, endurance, emotional intelligence, and moral clarity. It is the ability to remain grounded without when circumstances shift. So mental growth as well begins when we recognize that true power is internal. The capacity to regulate emotion, prioritize wisely, and act with intention creates long term stability. Without that internal governance, external success becomes fragile. Health, for example, depends on daily decisions that are often invisible to others. Balanced nutrition, rest, and disciplined routines produce vitality over time. In the same way, financial stability grows from measured spending, thoughtful investment, and patience. These behaviors are not glamorous, yet they build durable foundations. Happiness also deepens when perspective is cultivated intentionally. Gratitude shifts attention from scarcity to absolute abundance. Purpose transforms routine into meaning. When actions align with values, fulfillment replaces restlessness. There's also a powerful lesson here about adding value. When we focus on contribution rather than comparison, our relationships strengthen. Offering support without immediate expectation of return, that builds trust, and trust expands opportunity, and then opportunity stewarded wisely leads to sustainable progress. Organizing time effectively becomes crucial in this process. When hours are structured with clarity, distractions lose their dominance. Absolutely. Intentional planning reduces unnecessary problems and allows energy to be directed towards meaningful goals. So efficiency is, in this sense, is an expression of respect and our ambitions, and for our ambitions and for people who rely on us. Lasting relationships are not built intensely on intensity alone. They're built on reliability. Being someone who consistently shows up creates a reputation that cannot be manufactured. Over time, that responsibility, reliability and responsibility becomes a form of quiet leadership. So ultimately, this chapter, chapter 14, invites reflection on formation once again. Influence begins within. Stability is structured deliberately. Success rests on character, and freedom from avoidable problems arises when responsibility governs behavior. As we close chapter 14, perhaps the most important question is, what kind of influence are we cultivating through our daily conduct? Are our habits building environments of strength, clarity, and calm? Are our actions aligned with the future we say we desire? Put your comment in the comment section below. Let me know what your thoughts are, because growth is not accidental, it is intentional, it is structured, it is lived. I would like to interact with all of you. So, yeah, keep the comments coming, turn your notifications on. And as always, keep reading, keep reflecting, and keep becoming the best version of yourself that you can be. And thank you for spending your time with me again. We will be going on to the next chapter, chapter 15, soon, in the next couple of days. And I hope to see you on there as well. Thank you for joining me again on Michael Reads. Take care. Ta-da.